let's go.
All right. The first thing we got to talk about is the MVP situation. Joel Embiid's had an amazing season, but by most accounts, he's not going to get the hardware. This is something we saw online today. Looks like a lot of votes for Jokic, a few for Giannis, and not too many for Joel Embiid. What's going on there, Keith?
Yeah, did you see my name on there?
I did not.
Oh, you did not. Yeah.
No, those were guys that have already gone public, supposedly with an article or something about who they picked.
Okay.
And
Okay.
someone made a chart up of it. Yeah.
Yeah. My thing is I voted for Embiid, and let me stress this by saying this is the first time that I voted for Joel. In years past, I felt like he had pretty good seasons, but due to injuries and other things, I felt like he wasn't deserving. This year you look at the 76ers and the award is the most valuable player, not the player with the best statistics, but the most valuable player. And if you take Joel Embiid off the 76ers, and I'm sorry if I'm going to offend some Sixers fans, but if Joel Embiid wasn't on the Sixers team, this team would be playing in the play-in game right now. They would actually be playing in the play-in game. I mean, there are times if we want to talk about statistics, I mean, think about it. They played a team, Charlotte, the Charlotte Hornets, twice down in Charlotte, a 2-game homestand. Joel Embiid had like 40 and 10, 39 and like 20, stuff like that, just for the 76ers to beat that team. And we're talking about a team that was undermanned. He had to do that against an undermanned team. And this has been the storyline all season. So for me, seeing this, and I understand that, Nikola Jokic and Antetokounmpo, Giannis Antetokounmpo, have come on and played phenomenally down the stretch. I think this is an award that goes over 82 games, and from the start to the finish, Joel Embiid, in my opinion, has been the most valuable player.
No argument here.
Well, and I guess my question about this, Keith, is if you look at the stats, they are basically pretty much the same across all three guys. But I always look at the next step is who won? How many wins did they get? And Embiid and Giannis both have exactly the same records. Their teams do. Denver is in 6th place. They lost just a few more games, but that's how close this thing is. I mean, to me, Jokic would be the third, using my thinking, and then you could split a hair between the other two. Probably take Joel because he's our guy, but I wouldn't have a problem with a Milwaukee guy taking Giannis either, because they're pretty much dead on.
Yeah, and you're right, they are pretty much dead on. But again, like when I look at Giannis's team, and I get it, believe me, I get it. But they have Chris Middleton, who's a bona fide second All-Star. They have Drew Holiday. We all know Drew Holiday from playing with the 76ers. He has been the X factor for that team. You also have a guy, and I know Brook Lopez was injured for most of the season, but he came back, and then you have, Bobby Portis coming off the bench. All four of those guys will be welcome addition, or we have four of those guys will be welcome additions on the 76ers. So I get it. I know Giannis is the best player on that team. He's the type of guy that's always going to be in the MVP category, like LeBron James or Michael Jordan. You can always make a case for that person winning it. But, we're talking about, for much of the season, the 76ers' second best guy was Tyrese Maxey, a second-year player. Now, granted, he's been playing phenomenal basketball, but he's a second-year player that a year ago struggled to get in the rotation. So, so when you look at it, we're splitting hairs, but I feel like on this particular season, Joel Embiid, for all the stuff he had to do, he is the most valuable player. And here's what, if we're going to throw out stats, he's the first center since Shaquille O'Neal to win a scoring title. He's also the first center since the great Moses Malone to average over 30 points. He's the first center since Bob McAdoo in the 70s to win a scoring title, averaging over 30 points. So, we're talking about, this guy breaking records. He's doing stuff. And the 76ers haven't had a big man put up stats the way he has since Wilt Chamberlain, who's the greatest player to ever play the sport. So when you factor all that stuff in, everybody's going to throw up stats and everything, but we're talking about the stuff that Joel Embiid is doing is comparable to Hall of Famers when they were in their prime. So that's why he should be the MVP.
Yep, I was going to go over all those stats. Thanks for covering it for me, Keith. I appreciate that. All right, let's get to the playoffs. Let's get to the postseason, man. It all starts this Saturday. Sixers hosting Toronto. Game 1 Saturday, Game 2 on Monday. How do you like this series? A lot of people think it's got to be easy for the Sixers, but I'm not so sure. Toronto's a pretty good team.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes we get overly optimistic because we want our people want their team to do well. But when you look at this Toronto team, we're making a big deal out of Matisse Thybulle not playing, right? Well, the last two games, at least, on the road. The last two games that the 76ers played Toronto, Toronto didn't have their all-star Fred VanVleet, nor did they have their best perimeter defender and OG Obanobi. I just messed the man's name up, and I apologize. I apologize. But so, he's in a quality 3-and-D. But the only game that got me is that they won was the game where they won up, and the Sixers went to Toronto, and Toronto was playing without 6 players due to COVID. Right. And the Sixers, barely won that game. Tobias Harris had to have a 30-point triple-double, and Joel Embiid had to, dominate. So to me, everyone says this is going to be easy, I feel like outside of the Brooklyn Nets, this is the toughest matchup for the Sixers. It just is.
Well, Keith, I think I mention this to you every time we talk, and I say this every time we talk about Sixers, and it's chemistry or lack of chemistry, or do they play enough time together? We've added James Harden here down the stretch. We saw a lot of up and down from Harden, I guess you would call it. Have they played enough together to put this thing together and make a deep run?
That's the number one question. Initially I would say no. The key part is I hate the play-in games. I really do. I hate the play-in games. But for the 76ers, this works out perfectly because they're having a training camp, so to speak, where they're getting these practices in, they're getting these reps. The Sixers rarely practice on a regular season, but this time they're getting James Harden, trying to get them more acclimated. They're trying to work on their spacing. They're trying to do other things. So, we'll see. But, I don't know if when you look at this team, I see, right now you have James Harden, you have Tobias, you have Tyrese Maxey, you have Joel. And to me, Maxey and Tobias has to be a little bit more consistent. And you can say the same about James Harden, right? So when you look at that, I just think that they're going to have a tough time coming out of the East or even getting to the Eastern Conference Finals because they're not deep enough. And the players who they really need to depend on have been extremely inconsistent. And I just don't think that they'll win it this year.
So James Harden's not the 30, 35 point a game guy that he used to be. Does he still have enough left in the tank? And how is the hamstring? Is he healed yet, or is that still an issue for him?
Well, initially Doc Rivers said it was going to take about 3 weeks. And then, 3 weeks was last week. And he said the hamstring isn't bothering him again. Now, I think that at this particular time, if we think that, like you said, he's not that same James Harden, I don't expect that same James Harden to come back. I think that James Harden is at his best now as being a facilitator, and then hopefully for the Sixers being able to knock down a couple threes a game, right? But be a facilitator, have better command of the ball. I don't feel like that with the way this team is constructed, and also that he's getting a little bit older, his shot has been inconsistent. I don't think that type of player that he was in Houston will get them out of the first round. I think, but when we go back to his play early on, when he was the facilitator, getting everybody else involved, that's when the Sixers were at their best. But the other stuff that I saw, I know they keep saying the hamstring is better, but he just doesn't have any lift. A lot of times when he drives the lane, it looks like he's trying to draw fouls, and when he doesn't get it, he's grabbing the arm. It just seems like he's getting trying to look for a lot of bailout plays because he can't make the same plays that he used to years ago.
Well, I think you might have answered my next question, but I'm going to lay it out to you anyway and see if we got it. Do the Sixers need a game every night from Joel where he's got 38 and 15 and Harden gets 12 and 14 assists? Or do they need to be able to have Joel at 28, James at 22, Maxey at 22, and that kind of scoring to be able to win?
I think the latter. The thing is, Joel can go do that, but if I think, like, especially Maxey, if we see Maxey up in the 20s and we see James, I don't know if James have to score 20. I mean, maybe that it would be nice, but I think that the Sixers, if the ball is moving, that means if Maxey and them are knocking down threes and doing things like that, I think that they will be successful. I think, like, the best thing for the 76ers, the ingredient to win, is if we go to that Indiana game where they hit 23 threes. Now, I'm not saying they need to hit 23 threes, but it was one of those things where they had so much balance that opened up a lot of things. I feel like if Joel Embiid gets 30 or 40, that's great for him. But at the same time, it's not going to help you if Tobias Harris has 5 points and Tyrese has 11. So, I think it's more of the latter.
Now, Keith, it's only an issue 8 to 10 minutes a game, but the backup center situation. You got Paul Reed, you got DeAndre Jordan, and Doc Rivers doesn't really like to answer that question. What do you think they should do in terms of the backup center for this first series? And as a side note to that, what do you think of Doc Rivers, the way he handles questions about that? He kind of berates reporters for asking, saying, like, I know more than you guys.
Yeah, let me get the first quick part of it first. The thing is, I think, like, it's a tough situation because, you look at Jordan and he's a negative, he's a minus when he gets on the floor.
Always.
It's weird. It's like a lot of times we talk about them blowing leads. Well, they typically start blowing the leads when Embiid goes out of the game. You know what I mean? When Jordan's on the floor. So it's going to be kind of rough. And I think that, unfortunately for the Sixers and unfortunately for Joel Embiid, right now, and I mean this politely, I just don't have faith in anybody else to hold a lead. You look at Paul Reed, he's an athletic guy, but he's a foul waiting to happen right now.
Yes.
And he's undersized too. So what is he going to do against like a Brook Lopez type guy, right? That's the problem. But, and so I feel like it's going to be one of those things, I hate to say it, where we're going to see Embiid and he's going to go to the bench, and then next thing he's going to get he'll go to the bench right before like a TV timeout or something like that. And then all of a sudden he'll come back, because he'll be able to rest on the timeout. I think that they're going to have to increase his minutes, knowing wholeheartedly that if he plays the same amount of minutes that he's playing now against a quality team, that all they're doing is just setting up for blow leads. So to answer your question, I think that, we're going to see less of Reed. We're going to see less of Jordan, and we'll probably see more of Joel. The second part, with Doc, is, to me, it's a tough thing because I do get to berate things, and let's face it, I believe I was the first person who got into it with him, so to speak.
Yeah,
he laughed about that, right? But it's weird. I like Doc Rivers. I like him a lot, actually. But I feel like this has been like a stressful situation for him. It's been a stressful situation for the team. And it's kind of sort of like, you guys played sports. You know how like after the game, someone asks your coach a question, or even before a game, if it's a tight one, they kind of snap out at people. And maybe you can do it a little bit better than what you're doing. But I feel like that's what's going on. Is it a good look? No. But at the same time, but when I see stuff like that, is letting me know that, okay, this was supposed to be the year. Like last year, they lost in the second round. They all kept saying, "Oh, we'll get it back. We'll get it together. We'll get it together." And you look at this team, and this team has taken a step back actually from last year's team. The only difference is Joel Embiid is playing at an MVP type level. So when I see Doc Rivers doing this stuff, it's to me like it's frustration, and that's what it is. And unfortunately nowadays everything gets recorded and it happens. And sometimes you could do it a little bit less abrasive, less seeming like you're attacking. But I think a lot of it has to do with the frustration mounting. Because let's face it, they're not going to say it's Joel's fault. They may not say it's James Harden's fault. They're going to say, hey, you're paying this coach $8 million a year, and he can't get us out of the first round. So I think that has a lot to do with it.
And with all that said, back onto the court with Doc Rivers, does he have the skills to? I mean, he's got an all-time record that's fantastic in the top bunch, but can he take this team to the finals and win the finals? I still question that player rotation, and as you mentioned, the bench is weak to begin with, and that rotation is going to shrink more as you get deeper in the playoffs. Does he have the wherewithal to make that happen?
Yeah, it's going to be tough for him because, like the part of the thing is, when you look at Doc Rivers in the past, he had a lot of veteran teams, right? He had like veteran players. This one is like young, and the problem is maybe that's part of the frustration. Like you look at a guy like, and I don't think he can do it, but partly is the bench. Like you look at a guy like a Shake Milton, he's a scorer. He's not exactly known as a shooter. He can knock down shots, but he's a scorer, but he can't play defense. Furkan can shoot, but he can't play defense. Like even when Matisse plays, like if Matisse plays, he can defend, but he can't shoot. You know what I mean? So it's like, you're at a huge deficiency with everything. And you look at the roster, George Niang became a really reliable player, but he was a guy who couldn't get minutes on the other teams that he was on. So, like I think that it's going to be tough for Doc. And like you said, he does have that record and everybody's judging him by that. But I also think that, I hate to say this, I think it would be tough for Phil Jackson too right about now with this roster, So, but again, you asked a valid question. And if they do go out, a lot of people are going to look at his record. They're going to look at him and they're going to say, hey, what happened? You're supposed to be Doc Rivers. But I do think that this roster has a lot of holes.
Keith, last question from me. Who wins the Celtics-Nets series, and will we actually see Ben Simmons on the court at any point?
Let me answer the second question first. I mean, the way Ben Simmons, like, how he does like an emoji where like the mean face. Well, he did that, and like Twitter went crazy today because he did it at practice. So, I mean, who knows? Like, the thing is, I honestly think that Brooklyn is a dangerous team. But if there was one team that I felt like that could beat them and match them, I felt like it's the Boston Celtics. Just because their players aren't as good as the big two. But at the same time, I feel like the Brooklyn doesn't have anyone who can defend them. And I also feel like Al Horford, being a crafty veteran, I know he struggled here, but he seems like he's playing at a high level where he is now. So, and then Ime, see, don't discount Ime Udoka. He was assistant coach here. He became an assistant coach in Brooklyn. Now he's the Boston Celtics head coach. So he knows exactly what KD likes, what Kyrie likes. So I honestly think that Brooklyn had a great year, or a great turnaround to get back in the play-in, and they're a dangerous team. But I feel like that Boston is more their kryptonite than any other team in the East.